Okay, now we're going to read. So, this is Ben Franklin, the ultimate solution creator, and here we go. Oops, sorry about that. Benjamin Franklin is credited with an array of inventions and accomplishments. Among these are the repeal of Britain's Stamp Act, bifocals, the lightning rod, the Franklin stove, the reform, and creation of the original U.S. postal system. All are notable for being solutions in the 1700s to everyday problems faced by Franklin's peers or to bigger social and political issues like the American colonies' lack of representation during Britain's rule. Second paragraph. When faced with some kind of roadblock or trouble, Franklin was particularly adept at finding a way around it. Beyond his keen intuition that facilitated his discoveries and solutions, Franklin had an exceptional intelligence. This was evident in the way he approached problems. The man was famous for being economical, community driven, and supportive of education and hard work. He didn't come from a wealthy family and was well known for living simply yet smartly. Partly because of the straightforward but thorough approach to daily life, he was better able to invent and create or improve solutions to some of the era's problems. Take, for example, the trouble of having two different kinds of poor eyesight. Most people have only one vision problem at most. And during Franklin's time, eyeglasses to help nearsightedness or farsightedness already existed. Some people, however, experience both kinds of vision deficiencies whose scientific names are presbyopia, which is farsightedness, and myopia, which is nearsightedness. To address both at the same time, Franklin created dual lens eyeglasses, which offered a bottom half to correct one's vision of close by objects and words, and a top half enabling the same viewer to see far away. He did this by cutting the two different necessary lenses in half and combining them. This solution also made it possible to tailor the prescription of each lens to accurately correct the vision of the wearer. It is not a perfect system, and to this day, even if bifocals have improved, new users can experience headaches or dizziness when first wearing them. However, those in need of bifocals typically acclimate to the two-lens system, and in 1955, an optician named Irving Rips further refined the solution by creating seamless bifocals from one lens, improving upon the original design. The glasses meet their wearer's vision needs. Next paragraph. Franklin also addressed common problems. During his lifetime from 1706 to 1790, fireplaces and stoves were the only way to heat one's home. Burning wood or scrap produces smoke, not always what you want filling your house. To combat the issues of much smoke filling homes and inefficient heating, Franklin created a new system called the Franklin stove. Essentially, it was an improved fireplace meant to offer more heat and less smoke than the fireplaces that came before it. To do this, Franklin put something called a baffle, a hollow duct through which cold air entered and hot air exited, warming the room, and at the back of the stove. The baffle was open at the bottom and had two holes at the top. Cold air sinks and hot air rises, so the underside of the baffle was meant to take in cold air from the room, heat it with the fire's flames, and release the heated air back into the room. Franklin's other adjustment was the attachment of an inverted siphon to the baffle. This inverted siphon was a U-shaped duct that he thought would carry smoke away from the room and up a chimney. Interestingly, Franklin's stove wasn't particularly successful. It addressed two of the main heating problems of the day, inefficiency and an excess of smoke, but it didn't actually work that well. The inverted siphon only functioned correctly if the fire burned consistently, a factor that could not be guaranteed. However, given the problems and the way people built their homes in 1741, when Franklin invented his stove, the equipment he came up with is viewed as a solution that addressed the problems he was concerned with. Next paragraph. Besides dual-purpose eyeglasses and a less smoky fireplace, Franklin is also credited with inventing the lightning rod. This is perhaps his most famous invention, and with good reason. Before it, lightning striking one's home could have disastrous consequences, especially since houses were generally made from wood. The invention came about as a way for Franklin to test a hypothesis. He believed that lightning was related to electricity, a common piece of knowledge now, but new in 1750 when he invented the lightning rod. By understanding that lightning tended to hit the highest, nearest point, Franklin determined that putting a rod on the top of a building meant lightning would be more likely to hit the rod than the house itself. Franklin's lightning rod connected to a wire that ran down through the house and into the ground where it was attached to a ground rod. Both rods were made from metal, which Franklin theorized would conduct the electricity of the lightning. By moving from the first rod down the length of the wire, the lightning's energy could be safely transmitted into the ground where it would no longer pose a threat to one's home or body. Franklin didn't just deal with objects as solutions to problems. He was the first known creator of a pros and cons list, which is an invention to assist with decision making. In a 1772 letter to a friend, he laid out how he made difficult decisions. He divided a piece of paper into two columns, with one he headed pros and the other cons. He would think about the pros and cons of a particular decision for several days, writing them down whenever they came to him. When no more occurred to him, he would go through each side of his list, assigning a weight to every point. Then he would strike out a pro for every con. At the end, he would see if the balance was on one side or the other, think about the problem for another day, and then make a decision. Next paragraph. This kind of systematic approach to decision-making was probably quite useful for Franklin's overall approach to making scientific inquiries, which he applied in his research too. For instance, he was very interested in population growth, particularly in the American colonies. In the 1700s, the colony's population was exploding, but no one knew by how much. After studying the growth for several decades, beginning in the 1730s, Franklin published Observations on the Increase of Mankind in 1755. This essay explained that rapid population growth usually accompanied an abundance of food supplies. At the time, the Americans had the fastest population growth anywhere in the world and also had a huge amount of farmland, which meant they could easily nurture a growing population. Besides enlightening his readers as to why the colonies were experiencing a surge in citizens, he was also able to explain how much their area was growing. At the time he published Observations on the Increases of Mankind, based on his 2 decades of observation, Franklin theorized that the population of the Americas was set to double every 20 years. Next paragraph. During his lifetime, Franklin was also put in charge of systems affecting the population as a whole. He tended to improve them. In 1775, he was appointed the first Postmaster General of the American colonies. When he began the job, a letter traveling from New York to Philadelphia could take 2 weeks, even though the distance was only 109 miles. To get a letter safely overseas, a sender would send copies on several different ships with the hope that at least one of them would make it to the recipient. Post offices were very informal. They could be anything from a town's inn to its local pub. As Postmaster General, Franklin instituted several solutions that made sending and receiving mail faster and more reliable. First, he toured all the major post offices and the routes connecting them so he could learn more about the system as a whole. Based on his observations, he dictated more direct routes between these post offices and had milestones set up on the roads used by mail carriers so they could more easily follow the correct path. Roads were very poorly marked in the 1700s. Second, he specifically improved service between New York and Philadelphia, the colony's 2 biggest, most important cities, by having the mail wagon travel between the cities during the night as well as the day. Thus, more mail was able to travel faster. Lastly, he instituted a standardized chart for mail that made clear what it should cost to mail a letter or package, based on its weight and how far it was traveling. Next paragraph. In an unusual move, Franklin never patented a single one of his designs or inventions, which meant other people were free to copy them, improve upon them, or recreate them. He resisted hoarding his ideas because he truly believed that people benefited from one another's inventions. It gave society an advantage if new designs and inventions were available to all, because that way more minds could work on them in order to make them better. By coming up with devices and systems that address certain problems, but refraining from trademarking his inventions, Franklin paved the way for others to continually improve on his initial solutions.